CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to CMMS Radio. We are chopping it up today with Cameron Wight, and he's with L3 Harris, but we're going to get into some unique things about his background, what he really does. He's got a lot of experience when it comes to deploying CMMS platforms. So we're going to jump into that right now. Cameron, welcome to CMMS Radio.
Hi, how's it going? Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, now you and I connected online and we were chopping it up about a few things, in the messaging. And the one thing I was really excited about for today was getting into, of course, your background and your experience. We were just talking about a little bit of that, but you've done a lot of these CMMS implementations, and not just with a specific solution, but multiple solutions in different environments. So I want to get into all that, but how did it all start, and how long have you been doing that?
So I've been implementing CMMS systems for about 10 years in different capacities. Basically, I'm just an engineer. I just work as a guy between maintenance and design engineering. So essentially, that's what reliability engineers do. We chat with maintainers, figure out what they need, write it down in a system. We call it CMMS in this industry. Other industries call it ERPs, electronic records programs. It's the same thing. And we go talk to a bunch of design engineers and figure out what they intended to do originally, and hopefully keep these solutions running. And by solutions, I mean like products, military products or machines in industry, blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty simple industry, really.
And do you think so? I love that. So there is a tendency for a lot of people to make it way more complex than it needs to be, no?
Oh, yeah. I mean, CMMS stands for Computerized Maintenance Management System. So all you're doing is using a computer to manage a maintenance system. So really, that's just parts, tasks, consumables, and skills. And that's it. I mean, anything beyond that is nice, but I usually tell clients, just start with 10 work orders. Just start with 10 assets, 10 parts, and 10 people. Just do that, just to start with, because with those combinations, that's 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. That's 10,000 different combinations just to start with. So there's no point to open up a CMMS and put in 500 work orders. There's a very good chance most of them are useless. Just put them in as you go along, make them repetitive, try to proceduralize your business. And my favorite saying is boring is best. So try to keep things really simple.
I've heard that before. Right now, I can't recall who it was because I'm, really focused on this conversation. But there's a lot to it. As a matter of fact, there's a friend and a colleague of mine. His name is Brian Bieschke, and he's the one that said that. So I do actually remember, because boring from where you sit, what you're trying to do with a CMMS, with building a maintenance team, creating the culture of excellence, like the basic fundamentals, doing them really, really well. That type of boring is actually super exciting, right?
Yeah, I mean, what makes people do good work is a lack of anxiety. So like if you've ever gone to work and you feel nervous going to work because like maybe your boss doesn't like you, or you don't know where parts are at work, or it's really confusing, that doesn't make people feel good. So anxiety is a fear around an uncertainty of the future. That's what anxiety is. So in order to make something boring, quote unquote, it's to remove the anxiety. So do you have a task to do? Do you know where all the componentry is? Do you have skills to do it? Like, are you well trained? Are there people to ask questions of? And do you have the tools? Like, are your tools nice and organized? They're available. No one's stealing them. They're locked up at night, that kind of thing. Very basic. And then is there time in operations that's allotted for you to do your job as a maintainer? So the machine is shut down for you, it's cleaned in advance, or maybe you clean it and there's time given. But it's removing all the anxiety, the uncertainty about doing a maintenance task. And that leads to people doing very, very good work. And I'm sure you've seen that before as well in your job.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting when you take that approach to it, because that's one of the often overlooked aspects of what we do, who we work with. Like I often say, look, I'm only a certain type of expert. I'm not an expert at all. My job is to find experts and to explore these things. And right away, you've hit on one of the most important factors in what we all do every day, regardless of what we do, is those human elements. Shout out to Bob Latino. He loves that human stuff, as does
Yeah.
his brother. Anyway, the that's how it's really happening. So one thing I want to explore a little bit with you is we know CMMS is just a tool,
Yeah.
right? It's a tool that you're going to use. It's got a lot of upside as far as the benefits, what you can see, track, and manage. However, absent the basic fundamentals, the people, and the processes being in place, that tool would be set up even properly and likely fail if you don't have buy-in. So I want to explore that a little bit with you when it comes to coming into these environments that may or may not be in disarray. They may have a CMMS and need to fix up how they're using it, or they may be searching for one for the first time. But do you see that same thing where if the people and the processes are not essentially mostly dialed in, that it wouldn't matter what CMMS you had? You just wouldn't get much benefit out of it, or is there other ways to look at that?
Well, I don't think we as people, and people make up companies, are very procedural normally. I mean, not a lot of people have like organized checklists at home for what they eat. So it'd be kind of weird for them to have that at work naturally. So I've worked with a lot of small businesses and a lot of big businesses, and they're all kind of chaotic in their own way. I mean, they wouldn't hire you as a consultant to implement a CMMS if they didn't have some chaos. So that's pretty normal. Um, but I mean, I guess that's kind of like a doctor only seeing sick people. It's like, yeah, that's who shows up to see a doctor, of course.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, a CMMS is basically just organizing what we call maintenance information. But you can use it in operations. And like, there's been a lot of success that I've had in the past in using it in operations. But in terms of getting buy in, one of the worst aspects of implementing any sort of IT solution like a CMMS is it's not very visual. And human beings make decisions emotionally, and our emotions are impacted by pictures, sounds, movies. I mean, that's why we have all these like fancy war movies to like get people invested and
Mm.
drive spending in the arms industry, which I work in. Um, but CMMSs don't, in my opinion, focus enough on videos, pictures, voice clips, that kind of stuff. So in the medical facilities, for example, doctors often speak into a computer and then it's transcribed by a AI nowadays into a diagnosis for the patient that's recorded in their equivalent of a CMMS,
Mm.
which is something that I think is lacking in CMMSs today. Maintenance technicians should just talk to the computer instead of have to sit down and write it out. And this ease of access also leads to, I guess, another simple way to get buy in. It seems to be very arduous to get a CMMS up and off the ground. You have to input a couple thousand parts, a couple hundred work orders that are organized and well put together and thought through and based on failure modes. You have to train people. So if you can make all of this simpler and tell people that when they fill out a work order, remember a work order is just a prompt to do a task. So when you fill it out, just put in pictures, write a short description, and click done. That's it. Because really, in the future, what someone's going to look at is how did they do the work? It's primarily what they want to know. So if you take a whole bunch of pictures, you're showing me how you did the work. It's good enough.
Yeah, that and there's another thing. So you hit on a bunch of stuff right there. But the good enough part, there is a lot of debate. There always will be on whether good enough is good enough, if you know what I mean. Where in some instances we're requiring our teams or we're expecting for ourselves and think we need this excessive detail, like
No.
every little thing. And so you would agree that's just too much. But then again, we also want to make sure we don't fall below this imaginary line of what good enough really is. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like, what does right look like? I need to know, let's say, these 5 things. And if you add in a picture
Mhm.
or a series of pictures about what was seen during, let's say, disassembly or reassembly,
Mhm.
now we can put those things together. Is
Yeah.
that kind of a good little summary of what you're kind of getting at?
Yeah, sure. I mean, pictures are just worth 1,000 words, so they're a good way to communicate. And then a lot of CMMSs that I've used allow you to enforce certain fields to be filled. So there needs to be a title, a description, a location, an asset to assign it to, and the name of the technician. That's it.
Maybe the hours as well. How much time is
Hey,
spent?
honestly, hours I'm not too worried about in a lot of businesses because they're not accounting for inventory well enough to be worried about hours.
Yeah, so maybe the hours, those would be in a different environment where they're closer to that continual improvement phase, where they've got a certain level of maintenance maturity where they can
Yeah,
start looking for where can we get a 1 or 2% gain with the right kind
yeah,
of data that's gonna drive our vision forward,
yeah,
something like that. Okay.
yeah.
You and I were trading messages on something you were already talking about where in a lot of CMMS platforms out there, it's difficult or not very easy, same thing, I guess,
Yeah,
to load in videos.
yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes from bandwidth issues on their side. It
Mhm.
requires a lot of storage, and sometimes there's a workaround. You were talking about a workaround that you've leveraged lately
Yeah.
that seems to be effective. Are you comfortable sharing that workaround
Oh, for
when it
sure.
comes to
Yeah,
how people might leverage that same thing?
for sure. Yeah, it's two simple ways to do it. You train the technicians on how to make quick YouTube videos on their phone, and you set up a company or like a maintenance department YouTube channel that you can make private,
Mhm.
and then you just post the link from that YouTube video that they make into the work order. Now that's one way. Or the other way, if you're more, so I do this with businesses that are distributed. So, for example, I've done some work with a car wash that has a couple locations around Alberta and in Montana.
Mhm.
That I try to get them to work on. But a more localized business, I told them just use WhatsApp. So just put the work order number on a WhatsApp message to your boss and take a bunch of videos and pictures after you send them the work order number and then just close the work order because he can go back into his WhatsApp messages and search the work order number, and there'll be a video and 5 pictures. That way, let's say he's at the parts business or something, buying something from a supplier, and he wants to check up on what his technicians are doing. He can just do that on WhatsApp without
Yeah,
having to open any work order.
it's a good idea. And there's several strategies. I mean, I think, for me, I've incorporated different strategies over the years. One strategy was, SharePoint's a pretty popular thing,
Yep.
and sometimes organizations leverage it for certain types of storage.
Yep.
And if the CMMS in question has that option for active hyperlinking,
Yeah.
that creates the option. Like maybe inside of a specific piece of equipment, if there's a field where you can put, documents, other notes, meter reads, things like that, but also loading in videos about how it really works. How do I do the lockout tag out on this particular machine? Those things are also viable to leverage in the platform if and when you have the time. This is now I'm going to bring us back to the beginning where some organizations they get the CMMS or they have the CMMS, they've bought it, and now they're going to set everything up before they use it,
No.
and it's just going to take too long. Everybody will be tuned out, and I think that's what you were getting at. Where if you do the 10 times 10 times 10 times 10,
Hmm.
now you've started, you're actively utilizing the platform. You're going to start to see some early benefits through the development of information and data. Is there also, I'm asking if you've seen this, where is there also a tendency when organizations get their CMMS, they're really excited, they do that, and then they have kind of a, the honeymoon phase is over,
Yeah.
and now they kind of drop out. Do you have strategies that you've leveraged in the past successfully to reinvigorate the idea of adoption and ongoing use of the platform? And if so, could you share any of them?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, sorry, I sound like a broken record, but once again,
Okay.
pictures and videos. So human beings respond to images. So um, what keeps something in the forefront of a person's mind is recency and urgency. So if you're getting messages on a WhatsApp chat, or if you're getting messages from your CMMS system that you can click on and there's pictures and videos, you don't have to read anything, you don't have to study anything, then that keeps everything recent and somewhat urgent in that you're getting a notification. So if you want people to continue to pay you money to implement a CMMS, it needs to appear to be valuable. Having reports that are written by technicians sent to their manager that never goes anywhere and that aren't really presentable to management because frankly they're just maintenance reports. They're kind of boring. Um, those are not good as promotional items for continuing to implement a CMMS. Having pictures of a machine that's broken down that clearly is broken down, like you could have a grade 5 education, you would know that's broken down, and then a picture of it getting better and then a picture of it fixed, that is worth huge amounts of money in promotional content. So that can keep in the forefront of everyone's mind that this CMMS implementation is effective, it's actually working, it's being used in the business, and they don't mind continuing to pay you to develop it. But when that starts to stop, I notice the funding starts to dry up pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you kind of invoke the recency effect there. That's that makes me want to spin out into the domain where that actually comes from. I love that stuff, but
Sales.
we'll keep we'll keep it tight here. But
Yeah.
that's really back into that kind of human stuff
Yeah.
kind of area and psychology and all that. But when you go into these environments, do you have kind of a standard? I'm walking through the door looking for certain things, or more so, do you first want to see what the client is bringing up as problems? Does that make sense? What I'm saying is,
Yeah.
do you have a standard assessment process that you do prior to jumping in and actually helping with these deployments and implementations? Or
Yep.
do you first lean on what the client thinks the problem is?
So obviously, when people reach out to you, they tell you, I'd like to talk to you about blah blah blah, whatever, and they kind of give you a hint as to what their issue might be. But when I sit down with them, I ask them some pretty pointed questions and say, do you have users manuals for your machines? Do you have illustrated parts breakdowns? Do you have just a list of the machines you own? Like very basic things. And the reason I ask them this is in the past, I've taken jobs or taken contracts where I've been told that there's like data analysis that needs to be done. And then you
Mhm.
go in and find out they don't even have a list of their machinery, let alone any data on their machinery.
Yeah.
So, it's important to establish a realistic baseline for what can be done based on what they have. And often businesses hire consultants when they're in a fair degree of chaos. So they don't have data or a CMMS system or anything like that. And that's probably the best place to start.
Yeah. The one one thing that has held fairly true and consistent for me over the years was specifically with the assets. And
Hmm.
do they know what they have and
Yeah.
where they have it and how long they've had it? And
Yeah.
then from there, we start, do you know how often it's failing? Do you have failure codes, failure modes associated with that? These are all
Yeah.
critical things that I think businesses need to know about themselves at any given moment. And
Yeah.
others might say, well, Greg, they don't need to know that at any given moment. Well, I beg to differ. Talk to a reliability engineer and
Yeah.
they will tell you, oh yeah, I need that. And I need that when I need it. So
Yeah.
otherwise I can't figure anything out. I can't tell you anything. These are oftentimes big operations, or even if it's a smaller operation, these things are all linked together to the one thing that they need is constant throughput. So you
Yeah.
need to know what's getting in the way, what bottlenecks can be exploited or even eliminated. Because I think there's two perspectives on bottlenecks. Do you have an example of, without calling out a company name or even a solution, but an example of a really kind of big or complicated or chaotic scenario that you walked into, and then what was the turnout when you left, when your part of your job was done?
Sure. Um, so I like telling this story because it's kind of funny. So we had a millwright, and he had an idea about how to repair a fan that had broken. And previously, what we had done is we had gone out and like 6, 8 months before, we had gotten contacts for the company that makes the fan, and we had never actually called them. And we had, recorded the nameplate data, so the part number, the serial number. We'd measured the fan, all that sort of stuff. So we were good, right? We thought we were
Mhm.
good. So this millwright goes ahead and changes the sheave size on this fan because he didn't really understand that sheave size mattered. That's fine. Um, Changes it out overnight, doesn't repair it. The crew comes in the morning to run it, turns it on. It accelerates past its minimum or maximum speed and just self detonates, essentially. So we, of course, go, okay, that's too bad. We kind of know what happened, lack of training, whatever, that's fine. We go, great, we'll just contact the company, no problem. Phone the company, they don't answer. And this is 3 days before Christmas. So we go out and we start looking over the machine to figure out, is there another contact or some other part number we're missing? Turns out when you pry the nameplate of the machine off, there's another nameplate underneath it for a company that bought this company.
Ah,
And then you pry that nameplate off and you get the second company's nameplate. So there's three nameplates on top of each other. So what we ended up doing was phoning the oldest company, the one that had been out of business the longest. And it was just some guy who used to make fans in New York. And he says, "Oh, here's the story. This company bought my company, and another company bought that company. And I'll put you in contact with one of their technicians I still know." So we phone up this technician. He's nice enough. Turns out he's not Christian or orientated towards Christmas at all. So he didn't mind working over Christmas. So we paid him a boatload of money to make us a fan blade over Christmas and ship it out. And we ended up getting it on December 27th. And obviously, between December 23rd and December 27th, we reviewed our procedures on starting up new equipment
mhm.
and installing new sheaves. And we had a little bit of training with the millwrights on that, honest mistake. So from there on, we had a standard process for making machine repairs overnight and testing them before the next shift. And we also went around and removed all of the nameplates from all of the machinery to double check if there were more nameplates underneath them.
Ah, yes. And I suspect you might have documented all of this in the CMMS in some way, shape, or form.
Yes, and in that company, I had implemented a fracas system. So for failure reporting and corrective action system. So I had just left the Air Force a couple years earlier, and a big part of being in the Air Force is no one is ever to blame for anything other than negligence.
Mm,
Negligence is a big problem.
right.
So I was big in that company that I was working for on reporting failures, recording them, and writing out lessons learned. So we had some fun doing that. We had a little whiteboard session. I have a big one behind me right here. And we discussed what went wrong and what to do about it in the future, how to mitigate these exact issues. And we never had those issues again on any other piece of machinery because we put in these procedures. So that went quite well, but it was kind of funny that we blew up a machine that was made by a second or third owned company and eventually found somebody to talk to. And thank God he wasn't enthusiastic about taking Christmas off.
Yeah, he got you out of a big jam, and these are stories that matter as much as people may think they don't. They're impactful, and I think people need exposure to those types of stories because somebody might hear this and encounter a problem, and they might say, "Hey, did you check whether there's more than one nameplate?" Because
Yeah,
sometimes they put a nameplate over the nameplate,
yeah, they
and
do.
that's these are the nuanced best practices that a lot of people don't know. Maybe people that aren't reliability engineers, because you obviously think in a certain way, and when you encounter something unique like this, it really gets programmed in because you're playing the long game. You know how to get quick short term wins, but you're playing the long game as well. Well, somebody that's not a CMRP or not a reliability engineer, and maybe less seasoned as a practitioner. Maybe they weren't in the military, understanding systems and how you can apply systems to the real world to actually find, identify, do root cause analysis, all these things. They can benefit from hearing this. So I really appreciate stories like that. What is your best advice for folks that might be considering moving away from an existing CMMS platform, or maybe it's an EAM or an ERP, to another one? Is there any like one or two like best pieces of advice you would offer somebody to consider before doing that?
Yeah, I mean, let's assume that you're already committed to moving away from your existing CMMS. That's fine. Maybe you have a disagreement with them, whatever. But before you go and start working with another CMMS company, just try to upload like 10 tasks, 10 people, 10 parts, 10 assets, 10 work orders, and see if you can transfer them pretty easily and they transfer well and they're coordinated correctly. Because when you start getting into hundreds and thousands of work orders, even something as simple as you need to rename the work orders because the names don't transfer entirely correctly. Well, if you have 20,000 work orders and it takes 20 seconds to rename each work order, you're looking at hundreds of hours of paying someone to do that. And let's say you're already spending 50 grand a year on the CMMS. Well, you might spend another 50 just renaming 20,000 work orders or
Yeah.
200,000 work orders or whatever. So, be very aware the costs can skyrocket very fast. So make sure the transition is going to be simple and boring.
Now, building on that, is there a specific question or two? I know it might be like 10 or 12, but any questions you would encourage folks to ask the vendor that they're considering, like to really understand that vendor, and if that vendor really understands them? Are there any questions you would suggest they ask to kind of put them on the spot, but more so to see that they're getting involved with the right kind of a vendor?
Does your product allow for multi-site applications? So this is one of the biggest challenges. So let's say you're a business and you make, let's just go with fan blades because I used that as an example earlier. You make fan blades and you're in New York State. And then you decide, oh, hey, there's a person going out of business in Fresno, California. And they do the same thing we do. We're going to buy them. Well, your CMMS might not be so good at managing two locations, which is fine. Make sure you ask them, can you do multi-site implementations and how is that done? Can you show me? So something as simple as a part. If you have a part and you call it headphone 1 and headphone 2, so one's in Fresno, one's in New York City. You can call it headphone New York City and you can call the other one headphone Fresno. But it would be nice if it was just headphone assigned to different locations. But that's not
Yeah.
always possible in all CMMSs.
And part of the reason behind that is I kind of stand on this, having been there, done that as the provider. When we were building the system that we had. I don't promote that system or anything like that, but it was a phenomenal journey. And we knew right away when we were building the platform that things live at places, location first. And even though we might work with and deliver the solution for someone that has a singular location, single location, they may acquire another one. But we also at the time had a pool of clientele leveraging the platform with our pre-existing company that had multiple sites.
Right.
So we already knew that is an actual thing, so that you could do that multi-site management of your properties, your manufacturing facilities, your hospitals, your schools, whatever it might be. And plenty of systems just don't operate that way. So I think it's a great question you've suggested, especially if someone's in the kind of business that either has that or could potentially have that. I think it makes a big difference. And then when they go back and try to fix that, the vendors out there with the CMMS platforms, sometimes it's really hard for them to pull it off in a way that you described, where I can see and track what I have by location. Sometimes it gets a little bit, they use workarounds and it gets a little bit dicey as far as
Mhm.
how it's going to show up on reports and whether it's
Yeah.
accurate or not. So that's a good one that you brought up.
And
What about, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry, I was also going to interject and say from the contractor side as well. I learned this on my last contract. It is a lot of time to implement a CMMS at multiple different sites. Like it is not the same. Let's say you do it at one site. It doesn't take 50% as much time to implement it again. It takes, 70, 80% about as much time because it's the same amount of work. You're just faster. So I worked for a business that had 7 or 8 sites, and I was shocked at how much time I spent out of my whole contract just duplicating information, answering questions 8 times. It was a very slow contract that I definitely didn't make as much money as I should have on. I basically quoted them for one site, thinking that I could duplicate the work. That's not how this works.
Right.
You do it for one site, and you kind of duplicate it 7 more times, but there's a lot of work in duplicating it 7 more times.
Yeah. And it, it just goes to show that there really are not effective shortcuts.
No.
It is really hard to, it's very high risk if that's being done. I mean, even if you have sites, which I tend to call the locations, that are identical, there are always going to be nuanced
Yes.
things about each site, and you're always going to have to go, you can't skip the steps. You have to essentially be prepared to do the same thing over and over again. It's arduous, but stay focused on it because it really impacts the overall outcome. I think that's also good advice. I already asked you about the CMMS deployment failures. When it comes to CMMS deployment success, because I'm
Mhm.
assuming when you help companies, and you take on an occasional gig where you're going to help them implement and deploy, you participate in the training phase as well to monitor their early adoption.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm a big fan of 10 work orders, 10 assets, 10 parts, because that is the training phase. You have to get people using the system. And, older people, a lot of them don't really like using computers, and that's fine. So you need to get them on board because often their opinions matter a lot. So the training phase with just the 10 parts, 10 assets, 10 people is the time to get people on board to show the value of the system. And often businesses are really simple. We make them complicated as people, but I mean, one business I worked at, they made eye joists out of wood. It's a very
Mhm.
simple business. The product is about one of the simplest things you could ever make. Putting it together is somewhat complicated, but it's a bunch of linear machinery cutting wood, gluing it together, and shipping it out the door. So 10 work orders actually covers a lot of maintenance in that facility. So if you can sit down with the millwrights and electricians when you first get started and say, what are the 10 most important work orders, or what are the 10 most common work orders that you do? Then just use those as the initial implementation and training phase. And everybody knows what they are. Everybody's seen someone do them before. They're very relatable, and you can improve their implementation. You can improve the execution of those work orders by making them more visual, by making them more detailed, by writing out tooling lists. And you can show, hey, take your new guy who may have never done one of these very common work orders, get him to do one, and don't train him how to do it. Just get him to read the work order. And if there's enough detail in that one work order, he'll be able to do it. And there you go. There's the value of your solution proven. It limits the actual training outside of the CMMS that's needed. And everybody sees how the CMMS can be used for training, parts tracking, work order tracking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
This is a great case for how to approach it. And I now want to switch you to the fun question segment that
Sure.
everyone that comes on CMMS radio for the first time, for the most part, must suffer through. So, Fun question number one. What is your favorite music?
Oh, girly country music.
All
Like
right.
Taylor Swift, Shania Twain, that kind of stuff.
All right. All right. Haven't heard that one before. Fun question number two. What is your favorite sport or hobby? And on sport, it does not have to be one that you play. It could be one you like to root for, cheer on,
Yeah.
watch, whatever.
Oh, currently pickleball. My wife and I play that a lot. It's a good way to meet people. It's like a slow version of tennis for people who are not that athletic. There you go.
All right. Yeah, I know some people that play pickleball, so that's a good one. That's a good
Yeah,
one. Here's the big one, and there are no wrong answers on any of these.
sure.
What is your philosophy, perspective, opinion, anything at all when it comes to the concept of work-life balance?
Oh, this is good. I have these two pictures behind me. That's
Mhm,
Charon, the boatman from Greek mythology who takes you across the river Styx. And
mhm.
the other one is Azrael, the angel of death. So you're going to die one day. So don't take your life too seriously. Work life balance is a choice. Sometimes you work more, sometimes you work less. But one day you're going to meet Charon. So, chill out, enjoy your life. Work a little if you want to, don't work when you want to. Just try to have fun. No one gets out of this gig alive. So,
Yeah, and bring a couple of coins.
exactly. And bring some coins because apparently you got to pay them.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too. Well, for anybody that wants to get in touch with Cameron Wight, you can find him on LinkedIn. It's
Yep.
Cameron Cameron, and it's Wight Wight. Find him on LinkedIn, connect, have your own conversation. Obviously, you can see here he's very well versed in not just CMMS but maintenance management. He's a reliability engineer. Cameron, thank you so much for making this time and joining me on CMMS Radio.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS from selection to implementation to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.